Hello, I'm Chelsea King. I am the Executive Director of the Oregon Health and Education Collaborative, and we are a statewide nonprofit asking the question, if anything was possible, what would it take to ensure that every child, family, and community in the state of Oregon has an equitable opportunity to succeed? And I'm very happy to be here today with Peter Buckley, who is the program manager for Southern Oregon Success. And I'm really excited about this conversation because you are somebody who has been living into that question for some years. Well, thank you for being here. And I would love it if you could just tell our audience a little bit about your background and who you are.
Sure. Well, thanks, Chelsea. So Peter Buckley with Southern Oregon Success. Southern Oregon Success first is a collaboration of levels of education and healthcare and mental health care, human services, public safety, and workforce development in Jackson and Josephine counties. We're housed at the Southern Oregon Education Service District. So it's a community-wide collaboration that's been together for almost a decade now. And several years back, we started to really focus on this question that Chelsea is posing. My background before I came to Southern Oregon Success, I spent 6 terms as a state representative from South Jackson County in the Oregon House of Representatives, 8 of those years as a House co-chair of the Joint Committee of Ways and Means, which is the legislature's budget writing committee. Prior to getting into politics, I had spent about 22 years working in the theater on the West Coast as an actor, director, writer, administrator, producer, etc. So I shifted from theater into politics. After I left the legislature, I shifted into this collaboration work, which I've been engaged in now since 2017 full-time, 2016, 2017. So it's been really satisfying work, and we're happy to be making progress, really happy to work with the Health and Education Collaborative on this.
Yeah, very good. What a dynamic background. And I think that shows in the work you've been able to achieve down there in Southern Oregon. So what I'd like to do with this time with you today is just to have a conversation about what happens at that community level as you do this collaborative co-designing process to create a child success model. So what I think would be helpful is if I describe what we would ask design pilots who get selected to be part of this upstream initiative. As you know, we have a letter of interest open until June 9th, which is a Friday at noon, and communities are considering applying and submitting a letter of interest, and they're wondering, what exactly am I signing up for? Like, this sounds great, I want to do it, but what is it? And so what I'll do is just describe a few of the points that we're looking for design pilots to do, and then I would love to hear from you what that has looked like in a very practical, applied way.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. So as it describes in the letter of interest, the design pilots, one of the biggest things they'll be doing is participating in a local learning collaborative where in the cross-sector agencies in their community will be coming together to do some co-imagining. And they'll also, whoever's part of the design pilot will participate in the statewide or the OHEC level learning collaborative. So from those 2 levels, there'll be that cross-pollination and co-imagining. And what we're going to be asking folks to do is to develop a community specific, so there's that culturally responsive, locally designed client journey, and just look at the folks who they work with, the populations who they work with. What are some of the key touch points? What are some of the opportunities for interventions? What are the areas for improvement? And follow a client through, basically in the upstream initiative, it'll be the first 1,000 days of life, right? That whole perinatal period. And from that, blue sky imagining, if anything was possible, there will be a creation of a blueprint for a child success model. And this will include strategies for implementation, maybe methods for evaluation, how they're going to have connections, alignment with current initiatives, but ultimately angle toward a budget, a narrative for a 5-year implementation, right? So what would it take to fund this type of child success model? Because we have our eye on potentially replicating this statewide via legislation. So I know when I say all that, it makes sense to you because you've been doing it. I think you're actually at the final stages in your efforts. So can you tell me what that has looked like for you in Southern Oregon Success?
Sure, it's been a wonderful journey. I've got to say, it was kind of fascinating to me that I got out of state government and I started working with this collaboration, and the collaborations really started to focus on moving upstream as much as possible. And so we're doing all this work to say, okay, how do we support children and families? How do we go upstream? And we set a regional goal in 2019 to really focus on that children walking through the kindergarten door ready to thrive. So we said, well, if we focused our energy on that, what could we do there? So we had some programs in place. And as part of the effort that I was engaged with, I contacted former Governor Kitzhaber to ask a question about healthcare, because he's the preeminent healthcare expert in our state. And he got back with some information about how we get more healthcare benefits for early childhood workers, which is really what I was focusing on. And he kind of mentioned this idea, like, well, what if we just had a statewide effort where every region had the ability to define what it would take in their region to actually make this happen, to truly make it happen. So I brought that back to our collaboration. And I we got a challenge in front of us here to really answer that question. What if we really were to do it? And so we engaged with a group called Co-Creative. They're tremendous facilitators. And that's, I think, one reason that the idea of having a facilitated process really helps, to have somebody who's gone through collaborations and facilitation of meetings aiming towards development of this idea. And we were able to engage with Co-Creative, get some strategies together. And the first thing we did is we talked to our Family Advisory Council, which advises us on our collaboration. And they heard this story. They got very enthusiastic about it. And they said simply, why don't you ask moms? Ask pregnant women. Ask new moms. They'll tell you what it would take to create a system where every child had a chance to thrive. So that's what we did. We went out and we interviewed 11 pregnant moms, new moms, and people that worked with pregnant moms and new moms. And from that initial meeting, all these ideas start to just kind of spring forth. We are work groups working in various areas of early childhood support, but from these ideas from the moms, we started to ask people interviews, can you tell us about what challenges you face? Can you tell us about the challenges that other people that you know have faced with their pregnancies or with their families? And so we did craft, I think we did 14 separate kind of life paths of, okay, if it's a 17-year-old young woman who's pregnant and she is addicted, where does she go? Where's her first step? So we start to map that out. What do we have in our region to actually provide her the support where she could actually have a healthy pregnancy and she can actually have a really good foundation for her baby and for her to really thrive? So we started to kind of put those pieces together based around these kind of individual stories of the challenges that people face. And it was a great adventure. I mean, we lasted about 9.5 months producing this kind of blueprint that we produced for what it would look like for Southern Oregon. So we developed what we call the Southern Oregon Early Childhood Support Network. And it is basically using the assets that we have, great community partners, and really putting into play the information that we learned from all the different groups we talked to while we developed this plan, but also to really put in place the partnership between families and really trusted providers as a way to navigate through what we have as a network, all the resources, various resources we have, and to be able to put some resources behind the effort for each family in a way that hasn't happened before. So that's been our journey. And again, it's been a great adventure to go through. And we're very optimistic that we're developing something that literally every single child is going to have the support that they need. It's almost like every family that wants one can have a team of support. So I hope that's helpful, Chelsea. It's been a great adventure.
Yeah, that is helpful to me to understand what you've been doing, and also it just gives me a lot of hope for the future of our state and young pregnant people and their young families. I have a question for you around this idea of the vision that OHEC has is that this will be replicated statewide. And, potentially this could happen in the legislature with budgetary efforts. One of the things I hold is that the further out we go and the bigger we go, the less control we have.
Right.
And the reason why I frame it that way is because I'm curious at the local level. You all have been engaged with this work, regardless of what happens legislatively. Can you tell me about the value or the outcomes that you received at the local level, independent of anything that's going to happen outside of that process?
Absolutely. And you bring a great point. And looking back at my time in the legislature, one of the things I regret is I was not able to get more resources into early childhood when I was working with the budget. We were coming out of the recession. It was a rough road to go down. But my advice now to my former colleagues is really focus, get those resources early because they pay off. We can get those resources early. But you're right. We have to do this as if the legislature doesn't even exist almost. We have to say, okay, how would it work in our region, even if we can't get funding from the state? How do we coordinate our services in a way that we've never done before, at a level that we've never done before, and do it in a way that works really well for the families we're working with, but also for the community partners that we're working with as well. So I think we have some good advantages. We have a very good and proactive early learning hub, Southern Oregon Early Learning Services. So we really focused on our hub, which is already a kind of governance structure. So we have a governance structure in place, and the hub has cross-sector representation. So we can use the resources and the support of the hub to help develop these ideas. And the Early Learning Hub has been a great partner in this work with Southern Oregon Success. So I really think it's important to look at what you have locally, take the passion of the people that are working locally, the great ideas that come up. Just give you one quick example. Our Family Advisory Council, in bouncing around these ideas, coming out of COVID and everything, and they mirrored their opinions, mirrored a survey that the hub did of families. What do you need? It was the survey from the hub. And the families and our Family Advisory Council both said, we need places where we can get together. We're so isolated. We're so siloed and isolated from each other. So our Family Advisory Council said we should develop family centers, family community centers in Medford and Grants Pass. So within less than a year, we have a family community center in Medford and in Grants Pass coming organically out of this work we're doing together to try to design this system that'll make sure every child can succeed. That's a long answer, but there's a lot for me to talk about.
Yeah, thank you for that. My main takeaways from that are, number one, we do hope that the legislature invest in that early period, because we have great data that shows how valuable that is for to be preventative for those more downstream issues that we try to address. And two, that there was a lot of passion locally, and that you were able to harness a very strong early learning hub and come together in really creative and targeted ways, and that there was a local outcome, which is this very concrete, family center in both Medford and Grants Pass. So all of the above on that. That's awesome.
And speaking of the legislature, Chelsea, we did bring this idea to the legislature just to start to raise awareness of it this session. We really didn't think we'd have a chance to get funding or anything for the idea, but we wanted to introduce the idea of a child success system to the legislature. And it went before the House Bill 2726, and it went before the House Committee on Early Childhood and Behavior Health. And we had 2 hearings on the bill, and it got tremendous support from both Republicans and Democrats. In fact, the only complaint about the idea is, why don't we have this already all over the state? That was the complaint from the committee. The committee passed it unanimously, 2 ways and means. We're talking right now in mid-May. I'm not sure whether there's going to be funding available. Depends what the revenue forecast says. But the idea has been put into the minds of legislators, and legislators love the idea. That great common ground in making sure our families succeed. There's great common ground on that. So I'm really optimistic that if we can get these programs going in each region of our state, we're going to have support, legislative support, and it will have support from the governor as well, because everybody wants our families to succeed.
Yeah, thank you so much for that mention of the bipartisan or across the aisle support, because it's not a political thing. It's about setting up our children and young parents for success in a really family-focused way. Okay, so here's a question that I get asked quite a bit. How much time is this going to take? And so could you speak a little bit about our most precious asset, which is time,
Sure,
and how much time
sure.
y'all put into it?
So one reason I think it really helps to have a facilitator is that it decreases the amount of time that each participant has to put into the process. The facilitators, if you have a good facilitator, they're planning ahead. They're following up on the leads. They're the ones saying, okay, this came up in this discussion about childcare, for instance. So the next group you really need to talk to is this group that's focused on childcare, right? So they can help kind of guide that work. So we had the advantage of having good facilitators who had worked with before, and also a good portion of my employment could focus on these work groups too. So it's important to have not only the facilitators, but have someone in your community, at least one person in your community who's kind of responsible for being the through line, the common thread throughout the whole thing. So I would say for the work group members, it might have been, for most members, it might be like 2 hours a month. For most members, 2 hours a month. Some of our community partners were in multiple work groups. So if they were, it might be 2, 4, 6 hours a month if they were on multiple work groups. We did call 2 full network meetings, one in June and one in October. And I think the first one in June was 3 hours long, and then the one in October was 2 hours long to get all participants who had been part of all the different work groups on the same Zoom at the same time. So again, it's not a huge time commitment. As we found is that if you pose the questions and if you have the likelihood of having some of the solutions that are being proposed actually followed up on and put into a plan, the meetings go pretty quickly. In fact, in a number of meetings that we'd adjourn, it's a 2-hour meeting, and we adjourned in 90 minutes because we had already finished our work for that part of the plan. We'd already talked about if it's this woman who's 26 years old who is struggling with rent and has 2 kids, and one is in elementary school, one's in preschool, how the childcare. If we get that resolved, okay, well then we'll adjourn and we'll reconvene next time to focus on the next part of the plan. So not hugely time consuming for the community partners, but it is, it's another work group meeting, at least one work group meeting a month for the participants in the work groups.
Yeah, thanks for that. So what I'm really hearing there is that there is a certain number of hours for synchronous meeting time, and there is
Yep.
some work that is happening outside of that meeting time. And the
Yep.
key thing that was made Southern Oregon success effective is having someone like yourself who had a large portion of your FTE dedicated
Correct.
to the program, as well as a really effective, reliable facilitator to come in and help
Right.
guide that process.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Very good. Well, I think this has given us some really good information for communities that are thinking about submitting a letter of interest. My hope with this video is that folks feel inspired to just submit the letter of interest. As you know, we're looking for someone to submit probably as a backbone entity on behalf of a coalition of partners. And I guess just what I'd love to hear from you is just closing words, anything else that you would like folks to know that maybe I haven't asked about or that you want to double down on?
Well, I'll definitely double down on the kind of energy that's been created by this process. We've got some really great community partners, but the things that are happening again organically out of the process. We have an organization called the Oasis Center that works with pregnant moms and new moms who are in recovery, and works really closely in a kind of team effort, doing tremendous work. Well, they formed a partnership with our relief nursery now. So now the relief nursery is going to have a classroom at the Oasis Center. So, I mean, it's a partnership like that come together because people are focused on the same thing. So I can't say enough about just doing the work, even to get those connections made. And I will talk about the backbone we mentioned. The Southern Oregon Education Service District has been a great backbone for us. I mean, they allow us, we can use their business office handles our invoices. their tech people set up our website. So when you have a good backbone, it helps tremendously, because then you're not worried so much about, like, just kind of the basics of how do we get stuff done. You can really focus on what do we want to do and get it done. So I think that's important. And again, I would just encourage people to submit the letter of interest. The idea that we could accomplish this in every region, and I'm really looking forward to the learning collaboration as well, so that I can learn more about what's happening in Eastern Oregon, and someone from Hood River can learn out more what's happening in Southern Oregon, and we can talk to people on the coast and talk to people in Multnomah County. I think the more we have the ability, the chance to get those ideas, the more this can grow in a way that's increasingly effective for children and families. It's because that information, I know I like to talk a lot because I get enthusiastic about, but I recently was contacted by a therapist who had moved here from Louisiana, and she worked with children, and she found out what we were doing, and she basically volunteered. She said, okay, let me help, let me work with you to develop a kind of train the trainers effort, so we can develop coaches for parents. And again, this came organically. She heard what we were doing, makes the offer. So we're going to develop a program that takes proven coaching practices that she's been able to develop in her previous work, and develop a team of coaches for our region that can help coach parents as they're working with their kids, going through early childhood education, going through whatever systems that they're going through. So again, good things will happen. You know this, if you're this long, you know that this work is the right work to be engaged in, because we can make a huge difference for kids and families, and in doing so, we'll make a huge difference for our communities in the state.
Very good. I love the stories that you sprinkle in there, because it does bring it to life. You're building community, you're building a movement, you're building a container for folks to come together. And that's what you've been doing. Regardless of what happens in the future, that's work that has happened up to today.
I'll throw one more at you too. This parent guide came from our colleagues on the South Coast. It's called Help That Helps. So our colleagues on the South Coast, at South Coast Together, helped develop this. And it's a trauma-informed parenting. And so we're in communication with them. We help them get this translated into Spanish, etc. They said, hey, would you guys want to distribute this? So as developing our plan, all the different groups that are working on the Child Success Plan saw the booklet, and we put together a distribution network of 48 organizations, including all our local school districts, and we distributed 20,000 of these in 1 year. Just because the work was happening and people were talking, and the ideas came from the South Coast to us. We were able to get this in the hands of parents in our region. So again, I could go on and on, but I appreciate you letting me talk about it.
Yeah, you bet. It's such a great, I have seen that book in English and in Spanish. You connected me with the folks that published that book, and they mailed me a copy. So it is this cross-pollination to reduce the fragmentation, to reduce the silos, because there are a lot of good programs, a lot of amazing people. And what we're looking at is creating a more integrated system. So it's another good example of that. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the work you're doing down there. I have a special place in my heart for Southern Oregon. And so good to hear about the good work. And thanks for taking time today, Peter.
My pleasure. If anybody wants to email me, if they have follow-up questions, I hope you'll put my email address along with this video. And I'm happy to respond to anybody with questions.
That's very generous of you. I'll include your email in the description of the video.
Fantastic.
All
Thanks.
right. Thank you. Bye-bye.